Hello and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory and welcome to Africa 54. This is what's coming up. Israel intensifies its bombardment of Gaza. The military says it has hit over 100 operational targets of Hamas in the 14th day of the war. And in our entertainment report, Music Time Africa host Heather Maxwell has the latest music news from Ghana and the United States. All that and much more coming up on Africa 54. We begin our broadcast Friday with the war in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas. The conflict, which is in its 14th day, is the deadliest of the 5 Gaza wars for both sides. Over 4,000 Palestinians have been killed and more than 13,000 have been wounded, according to the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry. The Israeli military says more than 1,400 people in Israel have been killed, mostly in the initial Hamas attack on October the 7th. The director of Shifa Hospital in Gaza, the territory's largest, says its generators are operating at its lowest capacity. Mohammed Abu Salmiya says the hospital is prioritizing intensive care, nursery, dialysis, oxygen generation, obstetrics, and gynecology and heart care. As Israel continues to bombard Gaza with airstrikes, the military says has rather released a video of night attacks across Gaza, saying it hit over 100 operational targets of Hamas. In a post on X, the army says it destroyed tunnel shafts, munitions, warehouses, and dozens of operational headquarters, including eliminating a target that was in the naval force of the Hamas group. Palestinians in Gaza reported heavy airstrikes in the southern city of Khan Yunis, where civilians had been told to seek safety amid Israel's airstrikes of areas closer to the Israeli border. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres is at the Rafah border crossing between Egypt and Gaza, seeking to find a way to get badly needed aid into the enclave. Meanwhile, James Cunningham, the former U.S. ambassador to Israel, says that there are ongoing discussions about how to minimize harm to civilians caused by war. Speaking to VOA Salim Solomon, he talks about impact U.S. President Joe Biden's trip to the Middle East region.
The president has done a very good job of both making America's support for Israel at this difficult time concrete and apparent, and also there are important conversations going on, I know, about how to try to limit the damage to the Palestinian civilian population in Gaza, which is going to be horribly difficult to do because Hamas is using the people there as human shields as they have in the past. And also about how to start getting some humanitarian assistance into the southern part of Gaza, where a large part of the population has now moved to try to get away from the fighting further in the north.
The latest attack in the hospital, more specifically at the Baptist Hospital in Gaza. How do you think this specific attack, and although the warring parties are pointing fingers at each other, do you think this has changed the conflict's dynamic?
It's heightened attention to something that I fully expected to happen. I was ambassador to Israel in 2008 when the Israelis were attacked by rockets from Gaza, and they responded by sending their forces into the territory. And it was a very difficult situation, which very unfortunately replicated much of what we're seeing right now. This is not a new story. Hamas attacks, they withdraw into Gaza, the Israelis go in, the Hamas uses civilian casualties to inflame regional and world opinion and try to turn the tide of public opinion against Israel. It is hugely, horribly regretful that there have been such horrendous losses on both sides, and there will be more, I'm afraid. But I think the president has made clear, and we need to be clear, that this is something regardless of all the things that have gone on between Israel and Palestinians over the years, much of which I was part of when I was ambassador there. Conflict in this situation today is caused by Hamas, and that needs to be kept clearly in mind as this goes forward. No state, no nation could endure the kind of horrific attack that was inflicted upon Israel a couple of days ago and not respond and try to defend itself and make sure that doesn't happen again.
Well, that was James Cunningham, former U.S. ambassador to Israel, speaking to VOA's Salim Solomon. Now, as diplomats work to protect civilians during conflict, Egypt's foreign ministry is accusing Western media outlets of unfairly holding it responsible for closing the Rafah border crossing. Spokesperson Ahmed Abu Zaid suggests blame be directed at Israel for carrying out attacks on Rafah and for refusing to allow aid to enter the besieged enclave. French President Emmanuel Macron met Friday via video with families of French hostages captured by Hamas militants. France's foreign minister says that 28 French citizens were killed by Hamas in its attacks against Israel, and 7 French citizens are still missing. For more information on the war, VOA correspondent Jan Bochert is in the Middle East and joins us now from East Jerusalem. Jan, earlier on you were in Ramallah. Can you tell us what you saw there?
Well, it was another day of protest in the West Bank. Today, hundreds of people took the street of Ramallah after the noon prayers to protest against the violence in Gaza, but also against the president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, who is an enemy of the Hamas. Later today, there were clashes between the Palestinians and Israeli forces, and at least 5 people were shot with live ammunition today in Ramallah. I could see 5 people being shot today. It was another day of violence here in the West Bank.
It is, you bring out something interesting that most people may not be thinking about. Hamas is not necessarily in good terms with the Palestinian authorities, right? And what does that, how does that play out on the streets?
Not at all. The Palestinian Authority, the Fatah group, it's totally against Hamas. And the last days, the Palestinian Authority arrested a lot of people that were supporting Hamas in the West Bank. So in these last days, the Palestinian Authority is trying to cool down the protests in Ramallah and other parts of the West Bank. But there's a lot of anger there, a lot of frustration. And today, as we could see, hundreds of people, a lot of them with Hamas flags, went to the streets to protest again.
Do the civilians on the streets, what do they say about this sense that they're seen as being just all together, Hamas, Palestinians, and so on and so forth?
Well, people there have this feeling that they all belong to one nation without a state. So there's this feeling that they are fighting for liberation. That's what everybody says. We're fighting for liberation, and the people who are dying now, they are martyrs. They are the way for us to get freedom. That's what they say in this protest. I could hear this a lot today.
Well, thank you very much. VOA correspondent Jan Bochert reporting live from East Jerusalem. U.S. President Joe Biden made a direct appeal to the American people to continue funding Ukraine and Israel amid their war efforts. VOA White House correspondent, or rather White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara reports.
Displaced Palestinians sheltering in tents in southern Gaza as Israel continues its airstrikes, including one that turned this mosque in the central Gaza town of Deir al-Balah into rubble. This is the backdrop for President Joe Biden's remarks Thursday evening, fresh off his visit to Tel Aviv, as he asked for more funding for Israel, a key U.S. ally, as well as to support Ukraine against the Russian invasion.
Hamas and Putin represent different threats, but they share this in common. They both want to completely annihilate a neighboring democracy.
Israel has bombarded Gaza, killing 3,000 and displacing more than 1 million people, mostly Palestinian Arabs, in response to the militant group Hamas incursion on October 7th, which killed 1,400 people in retaliation for Israel's decades-long occupation. In supporting Israel, Biden said America must also keep its commitment to help Ukraine in its fight against Russia's invasion.
History has taught us that when terrorists don't pay a price for their terror, when dictators don't pay a price for their aggression, they cause more chaos and death and more destruction.
Biden did not say how much he is requesting. The amount will be known Friday when presented to Congress. The House must have a speaker to pass legislation. So far, no Republican has been able to secure the 217 votes needed to claim the Speaker's gavel, following the ousting of former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy earlier this month. Meanwhile, protesters calling for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas descended on the U.S. Capitol on Wednesday. An October 16 Reuters Ipsos poll shows that 41% says the U.S. should support Israel's position.
American leadership is what holds the world together. American alliances are what keep us, America, safe.
That argument will be viewed with skepticism. Massive and, in some cases, violent anti-Israel and anti-U.S. demonstrations have erupted in various capitals around the world. Many protesters see Israel as an occupying force that continues to annex Palestinian territory supported by the U.S., even as the administration denounces Russia's annexation of parts of Ukraine. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, Washington.
As President Biden works to secure the necessary funding for Ukraine and Israel, viewers Paul Dio spoke to Professor David Monda of City University of New York to gain further insight.
He really used this opportunity to try and, number one, create a very balanced narrative around the need for Israel to defend itself on one hand, but also trying to empathize with the Palestinian suffering in Gaza. Try to tie it to a domestic context where there's a lot of now Islamophobia coming up with he mentioned the recent stabbing and killing of the young boy in Chicago, the Palestinian boy, but he also raised the broader issue of the anti-Semitism, right? The Jewish synagogues and Jewish people actually now feel threatened. But the second element I think that he raised that was really interesting was to try and tie the Israel-Hamas conflict to the Russia-Ukraine conflict and trying to show Israel and Ukraine as bastions for democracy and to make the case as to why the United States needs to be vigilant and active in the Middle East and also to support Ukraine against Russia.
How would you respond to people who are saying that he's trying to have it both ways? For example, he's cheering on Israel and saying that we are 100% behind you, despite the outcry from human rights activists, human rights agencies, the people of Palestine, people who are being bombarded.
We have to understand Biden has to continue with the foreign policy that has been laid there, not only by himself, but by Trump, who was there before him, by Obama, who was there before Trump, by Bush, who was there before Obama, and for a whole tradition of American presidents going back to Harry Truman, right, with the creation of Israel in 1948. America has generally had a very pro-Israeli foreign policy in the Middle East. It's very difficult for Biden to steer away from that. But I think his challenge has also been that within the Democratic coalition of the party, there are a lot of pro-Palestinian or sympathetic Palestinian elements within the Democratic Party have been speaking out.
Let's talk about the current state of affairs, the humanitarian crisis in that region. Close to 3 million people. They have no place to go. No Arab country wants to open their borders. They are being bombed from the sky. They have no place to hide. Gaza is not a safe place. The United States has brokered a deal where they're going to allow in 20 trucks from Egypt to go to Gaza. Is that enough?
I do not think that is enough. And if I may, the challenge you have with Gaza is you have Hamas inside Gaza with the people, with these 2 million people. It's very difficult to differentiate a Gaza youth from a Hamas militant. President Biden and President al-Sisi were talking about opening a humanitarian corridor. But even then, Egypt has itself said these people cannot get into Egypt because Egypt does not want to have to deal with refugees once this conflict is over, because Egypt itself can't even take care of its own people adequately. The bombing and the military offenses which is going to happen is actually going to make things worse. And it's going to radicalize the Palestinians even more. But more broadly, it's going to probably lead to a regional war where countries like Iran, other Muslim countries, which were thinking of reestablishing links with Israel, will put that on hold.
Well, that was Professor David Monda at the City University of New York speaking to VOA Spondio. Well, Chorus International has just launched the Food for Progress Traceability and Resilience in Agriculture and Cocoa Ecosystems TRACE project in Abuja, Nigeria. Now, the launch coincided with the second Global Cocoa Festival. To tell us more about TRACE, I'm joined from Abuja, Nigeria by Masik, who is a Chorus International Vice President of Rural Economies and Agricultural Livelihoods, joins us via Skype. Welcome to Africa 54.
Thanks, Vincent.
Yes, now first tell us about the project itself, TRACE, what really you do, what the objective is with that.
Excellent question. So we're here in Abuja, Nigeria, launching the new Food for Progress program supported by the U.S. Department of Agriculture to basically support the increased productivity of cocoa in Nigeria, as well as ensuring access to markets for Nigerian cocoa. The program itself will target about 1/3 of Nigeria's cocoa producing states, but will cover nearly 2/3 of the overall production because it's quite concentrated in Nigeria. And so we'll be looking at issues of climate smart agriculture, what we call climate smart cocoa, ensuring that cocoa is produced in an environmentally sensitive and sustainable fashion, and also ensuring that Nigeria's cocoa continues to be able to access the global markets for cocoa and chocolate that are increasingly concerned with the conditions of production, whether deforestation has recently occurred, whether there's presence of child labor, and whether the cocoa business itself is paying a fair wage.
And we know that some of those are really old problems, especially the labor situation and also the environmental degradation. To what extent are the local authorities working with you to ensure that those areas are at least once and for all addressed?
Excellent question. We are working very closely with the government of Nigeria, both at the federal level and at the regional state level, where the government has recently announced a new national cocoa development plan, which is in the process of being put into policy and practice. It will require some changes in the Nigerian regulations and policy, but we're pleased to be working with the government and with the private sector to ensure that the cocoa produced by Nigeria meets international standards, both in terms of safety and quality. And part of that is ensuring that child labor, particularly the worst forms of child labor, whereby children might be mixing chemicals or using sharp instruments or carrying heavy loads, is completely eradicated from the cocoa value chain, and that while they may work on the farm, they're not actually exposed to any hazards. In addition to that, we're also very concerned with the pressure on land and natural resources that cocoa productivity and cocoa production can have, and making sure that cocoa doesn't inadvertently result in new deforestation in some of the areas that are of high biodiversity value for the world and for Nigeria.
Yeah, that's good news for the farmers and also for us, the consumers. Thank you very much. Paul Mashik is Chorus International Vice President of Rural Economies and Agricultural Livelihoods, rather. Thank you very much. Well, still to come, the latest on Ghanaian musician Fancy Gadam. We'll be right back.
In increased demand for natural hair care products and protective hairstyles such as braids, weaves, and wigs has made the African hair care business a multi-billion-dollar industry. Global beauty giants like L'Oreal and Unilever are now competing with African women who are dominating the booming black hair industry. On the next edition of Our Voices, we will take a closer look at black hair industry and introduce you to African women in the diaspora who are making a name for themselves in the lucrative business. Join the conversation each week right here on Our Voices.
You're watching VOA's Red Carpet. My name is Jackson Vunganye. Thank you so much for joining us each week right here on Red Carpet. We bring you the latest in...
In other news, the South African government says it could play a meaningful role in any talks to end the conflict between Israel and Hamas. The governing African National Congress says it has close relations with Hamas. South Africa has advocated for self-determination of Palestinians and called for the two-state solution with separate nations for Palestinians and for Israelis. On the eve of the first anniversary of the bloody repression of a protest against military rule in Chad, the opposition still faces arrest, intimidation and threats despite a looming referendum on reform. The vote on a new constitution is scheduled in 2 months and is due to set the stage for free elections and a return to civilian rule. French military officials say the first convoy of troops that were withdrawn from Niger have arrived in Chad's capital after 10 days on the road. N'Djamena is France's military headquarters for the Sahel. France deployed 1,400 soldiers, fighter jets, drones, helicopters and armored vehicles in Niamey and western Niger to battle fighters linked to IS and Al-Qaeda. Well, it's time now for Entertainment Report, and joining us now is Heather Maxwell with the latest music news and notes. Hello, Heather.
Hello, Vincent. Hello, everyone. Well, some great live African music hit my radar this week. First off, in Tamale, Ghana, Fancy Gadam is holding a mega concert this weekend, launching his new album, Competition. Now, Fancy is known for filling stadiums. His fans absolutely adore and are committed to him. And we expect this concert will be a sellout as well. But radio personality and entrepreneur Samed Gaida spoke with Fancy earlier this week to find out what's special about this album and this concert.
Hello, Heather. Well, we are here today at the residence of one of the maestro as far as music is concerned. We call him Ahmed Mujahid Bello, but the whole world knows him as Fancy Gadam. Well, he has something fresh for his fans this coming weekend. We are here to talk to you about an album.
Yeah.
That is titled Competition.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the launch. So you are having a full launch for the album this coming weekend.
Yeah.
I've noticed that you have billboards. So far, I've seen, if I'm not mistaken, about 3 to 4 billboards in town, which happens to be the first time I'm seeing a massive promotion for an album launch that you are releasing.
Yeah.
What's so special about this album that you have to do this massive promotion for it?
Yeah, so that tells you how serious and then how I believe in the album. I have about 10 billboards. It is not 4 or 3. Wow. I have about 10 billboards across the whole northern region. Yeah, because we have one in Boga, one in Wa, one in northeast region, and then one in Yendi, and then the other 6 are in the northern region. I mean, in Tamale.
Wow.
Yeah, so it tells you how serious we are about this album.
The concert. What should fans expect coming this weekend?
Yeah, so they can see how serious we are, and that is why we are entreating them to come out in their numbers. We cannot spend all these monies just for ourselves. We're doing all these things because of them, for them to appreciate the work we are putting in, and then they will come out and support us. The new song that I'm going to give you, The title is If.
If.
You can look for it anywhere.
Okay.
Beautiful song.
All right.
If you don't understand my body, this is for you. Girl, now you waiting for my mind. I swear I no go lie. If you leave me, I go die. Yeah, yeah. Girl, now you waiting for my mind. I swear I no go lie. If you leave me, I go die. Yeah, yeah. Baby, send me.
All right, if you are in Ghana, that's surely going to be an exciting show. But now, on a much different style of music, in a different stage, Malawian duo Madalitso Band performed in Piedmont, Virginia over the weekend in a barn in a little town of Berryville at the foot of the Blue Ridge Mountains. My Music Time in Africa team was there, we filmed it, and I'll have that story for you next week. But to kick you off into the weekend on a high note, a couple of high notes actually, check out this preview. And that's it for entertainment this week. Vincent, back to you.
Well, thanks a lot, Heather. And that's our show for today. Wish you all a good night.